More to the point, these stories chronicle a series of lessons for more living, and I wanted to arrive at an understanding of how to open a research process that remained in integrity with my identity as a Dain Mandan Hidatsa and Arikara woman. After a short time and with counsel from family, I learned that an epistemological antecedent necessary in approaching the traditions of inquiry and knowledge making was to recover and enact practices inclusive of non-human relations, e.i. cedar, sweetgrass, and sage. Practices customarily missing from linear, solitary, and disembodied academic training. Engage meaningfully non-human relatives improve our faculty of thinking by endowing us with maximum clarity. Engage inappropriately or not at all can result in the researcher exteriorizing themselves from their research. And so, what else does this involve and lead to when such exercises are influenced by cultural sensibilities? The answer is not simple. Like the process associated with beading, sewing, carving, weaving, and painting. The manner in which knowing is made material is as diverse as the meaning of the patterns formed by their makers. That said, one thing remains clear. We must embrace the historical challenge to actively struggle against repressive forces that seek to rob us of our sense of humanity. Within each of the anecdotes shared, one can see progression of awareness in the ability to use indigenous methodologies and frameworks in the dissertation and early scholarship for each of us. Over time, there has been a deepening awareness to be more indigenous based on the grounded in ancestral knowledge and ways of being in approaching research and scholarship. These anecdotes provide evidence of which this book is of utmost importance, so that current and future indigenous higher education scholars see themselves being honored in what is accepted as scholarship in the academy. Evolution of indigenous higher education scholarship. The evolutions of higher education scholarship began in early works of non-indigenous scholars writing about Native Americans students and open from the deficit perspective. Shotton et al. 2013. As referenced in the introduction, in recent works completed since the turn of this century, indigenous scholars have begun to transform scholarship to be indigenous-based and reflective of the conceptual frameworks and values of their own indigenous roots and passion to give a strengths-based insights into Native student experiences. We are living at a time in which we have a growing number of indigenous scholars in higher education. To address critical issues facing indigenous students, administrators, and campus contexts that affect the persistence and lived experience of those who are indigenous in higher education. In this section, we will address how spaces have begun to be created within the available literature surrounding natives in higher education, and then the need to plant seeds to grow and cultivate future generations of indigenous scholars, creating our own spaces through our scholarship. Within the last 15 years, we have witnessed an increase in the scholarship written by and with indigenous practitioners and scholars in higher education. In 2003, the renaissance of American Indian higher education Anne Beham and Stein, which address issues and realities in Native higher education inclusive of a TCU perspective, was released. Following was the publication of Serving Native American Students, Pax Law and McClellan 2005, which addressed the live experiences of Native students, faculty, and administrators in higher education. This became a resource that many have cited and revered as a cornerstone publication. Subsequent to that, Warner and Gibb 2009 addressed the TCU perspective with their book Tradition and Culture in the Millennium. This book highlighted the specific issues and needs of TCUs, such as leadership and mentorship of future TCU presidents and the realities of retention and financial aid for TCU college students. A couple of recent pivotal books that address Native higher education realities include Beyond the Asterisk, Understanding Native Students in Higher Education, Shoton et al. 2013, which highlights practices in higher education from the first-year college student affairs, professionals, administrators, and faculty perspectives, and indigenous leadership in higher education, Minthorn and Chavez 2015, which examines a specific topic in higher education that is often left out of the research and practice, indigenous leadership. This book reframes how leadership is viewed in higher education from a Native American perspective, and more important, includes the voices of Native American students as authors. This is cursory overview of books by indigenous practitioners and scholars that have been released within the early part of this century. Each has contributed an indigenous voice and perspective to the broader scholarship. This book will add to those contributes by highlighting current research in higher education from an indigenous scholar conceptual framework and methodological approach, planting seeds and cultivating future generations of indigenous scholars. With the growing of the numbers of indigenous scholars in higher education, there is an urgent need to mentor and ensure the growth of more indigenous faculty in higher education. This growth should take place as well in other roles, such as non-profit organizations, statisticians, and public policy, where we are continuing to break the glass ceiling. This mentoring should begin early, prior to entering a doctoral program, at the undergraduate level, and even as early as the high school level. The more the Native youth see other tribal members who have obtained a PhD and can achieve a terminal degree, the better they can begin to see it as a possibility for themselves. Part of planting seeds is for those of us who have earned an advanced degree or who hold faculty positions to become the mentors as well as system changers. With this book, we are attempting to reconstruct the narrative and expectation that one who conducts research has to do so within a Western lens and approach. We are at a place and time which we hope to change the narrative and expectations that allows authentic research and work that honors and allowed for indigenous perspectives that are not only accepted but also expected within the publishing and tenure and promoting process. We hope to create a counter narrative that will become the new narrative of indigenous scholarship in higher education. This narrative will enable the seed planted for future indigenous scholars to grow and have a system in place that can enable their transition into academia to be one of authenticity rather than assimilation. The need for indigenous and decolonizing methodologies in higher education research. Lay Kuwanwisiuma of Maccabi, Arizona, recounted an event in Beyond the Mesas, a documentary film based on the boarding school experiences of Hopi people that occurred in the early 90s. This historical moment involves 4 Hopi chiefs who met with other village leaders to discuss the prospects of Western education for the Hopi. In the following vignette, Kuwanwisiuma shared Chief Lo'oloma's pedagogical perspective on the issue of mainstream schoolings and Hopi existence. Lo'oloma said it is a reality futile to resist that white man's way. The way for the Hopi to survive as a culture is like this: learn how he thinks, learn how he speaks, learn his language, leave the bad things alone, take the best things of the white man's world so that we can also survive with it. Lo'oloma exemplified his words by binding 2 different colored strings around a ceremonial stick and said, This is the good things of the white man, and this is the good of Hopi. Twine them together and you're going to be twice as strong. That's how Hopi is going to survive. Kuwanwisiuma Koyiyum Tewang Gilbert Eckner and Holzman 2006. Lo'oloma recognized very clearly that the Hopi had to repattern their thinking by pollinating 2 traditions of thought to interpret and plot a path in an emergent bicultural world befitting the present time. Lo'oloma's rendering is significant to the discussions in this book for the prevailing distinction between the culture of higher education and that of indigenous people is the manner in which we epistemologically encountered and understand one another. This view is readily supported by the fact that the settings of academe do not often allow for the thinking of knowledge as the hybridized bundling of cultural experience as mainstream methodological traditions often encourage us to marginalize ourselves. Davidson's 2015.